Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm rising today to speak to Bill C-42, which is the government's proposal for a beneficial ownership registry. And I'd like to critique this registry because this is an incredibly important issue, Madam Speaker. The fact of the matter is that Canada has become a haven for global money laundering. In fact, don't take it from me, Madam Speaker. Here's just some international reporting on Canada. From the New York Times, just several months ago on March 25th, 2003, an article written by Ian Austen, the Times journalist that covers Canada, begins with the sentence, "Canada is such an attractive place for money laundering that there's even a special name to describe the activity here, snow washing." That's the first sentence in a New York Times article of March 25th, 2023. The U.S. State Department, just several years ago in 2019, designated Canada as a, quote, major money laundering country, end quote. That's the U.S. State Department. In fact, I pulled up their report from March 2022 last year titled Volume 2 of International Narcotics Control Strategy Report. And it says in the report, under Canada, that it is estimated that between $36 billion and $91 billion is laundered annually in Canada. Now, assuming those are US dollars, that represents roughly between $50 and $120 billion a year that is laundered through this country. $120 billion a year is roughly 5% of our GDP. 5% of our GDP consists of money laundering. In that March 2022 report, it says, quote, noted deficiencies include limited oversight of the domestic nonprofit sector, gaps in customer due diligence responsibilities for designated non-financial businesses and professions, and a lack of beneficial ownership transparency for trusts and similar legal mechanisms, end quote. And so not only has our status as a money laundering haven and by consequence a sanctions haven, avoiding haven, and the proceeds of international crime haven become documented in the New York Times, it's also been noticed by the State Department. And it's not just internationally that it's been documented. In the province of British Columbia, there was a huge commission of inquiry into money laundering. Its final report was published in June of 2022 by the Honourable Austen Cullen, who was the commissioner of that commission. And that commission found that billions of dollars were being laundered through British Columbia companies, through British Columbia real estate, through British Columbia trusts, and that this was having a deleterious impact on people living in British Columbia. This report came out just last year highlighting the problems with money laundering just in one province. It represents roughly 10% of Canada's population. And so it's clear that we have a problem with money laundering, and by consequence, we also have a problem with becoming a destination for the proceeds of sanctions evasion and a destination for the proceeds of international criminal activity. And so the government introduced this legislation in part to try to respond to these very real concerns. But the problem with the legislation in front of us is that it's deeply flawed. I asked the Library of Parliament to do some research on the number of federally incorporated entities in Canada. And the information they provided me was that for the year 2020, the most recent year for which data has been provided, the number of CBCA corporations, in other words, federally incorporated entities, is 421,301. The problem is that there are some 4.3 million businesses in Canada. 4.3 million businesses, of which only roughly 10% are CBCA corporations. 90% of businesses in Canada are incorporated under 10 different provincial statutes of the 10 different provinces. And these corporations and trusts are not included in Bill C-42's beneficial ownership registry. Now, the government will say, well, we're working with the provinces to encourage them to create a federal, a beneficial ownership registry. The problem is that one province hasn't made any moves to create one. That's Alberta. And the problem with the other provinces is that their beneficial ownership registries have major loopholes in them. The only beneficial ownership registry in the country that is worth the paper that it's written on is the province of British Columbia, where in their proposed registry, they're including provincially incorporated entities, they're including trusts, they're including real estate, and they're capturing all of that in their registry. And as a result, that provincial registry, combined with the federal one, will include all companies in the province of British Columbia. But the problem for the other 9 provinces is that they're not including real estate, which the Cullen Commission in British Columbia identified as a major asset through which money laundering, international money laundering in particular, is being laundered. And so this registry in front of us is only as good as the weakest link in the entire system. And because 9 of the 10 provinces are not, at least 8 of the 10 provinces are not including real estate in their beneficial ownership registry, as a result, people overseas trying to avoid sanctions enforcement, people overseas that are trying to launder the illicit proceeds of crime and terrorism will be able to use Canadian real estate in 8 out of 10 provinces to continue to launder their money, just like the Cullen Commission identified in the province of British Columbia. And for those individuals overseas and outside of Canada that want to avoid sanctions, if they want to avoid, if they want to launder the illicit proceeds of their crimes or the illicit proceeds of terrorism, can do so through provinces where a beneficial ownership registry for provincially incorporated entities has yet to be proposed. And so, Madam Speaker, it's clear that this proposed beneficial ownership registry that the government has put in front of us today isn't going to solve the problem of Canada's status as a destination for snow washing, as a destination for international money laundering. And so what the government should have done, Madam Speaker, what they should have done is they should have used the broad and deep criminal powers accorded to it in the Constitution that courts in this country, through various rulings, have long upheld as being broad and deep, to create a national beneficial ownership registry that would have included all companies in Canada, whether they're incorporated under the Canada Business Corporations Act or whether they're incorporated under one of 10 provincial statutes. That should have included all trusts in Canada, whether they were incorporated federally or provincially. That should have included the beneficial owners of all real estate, real property in Canada, in order to ensure that we start cracking down on those who would use our country as a haven for money laundering, for the proceeds of terrorism, or for the proceeds of crime. But as with many things with this government, Madam Speaker, they didn't proceed down that path. And so once again, we have an implementation of a good idea from this government in a very flawed manner, as it's been with so many things that this government has made announcements about. And so, Madam Speaker, I'll finish here, but this beneficial ownership registry in front of the House today is not going to plug the hole that has allowed this country to become such a haven, such a destination country for sanctions evasion, for the proceeds of crime, for the proceeds of terrorism, and for money laundering in general, that's landed us up this March on the front page of the New York Times and in the State Department's assessment of global havens for money laundering.